Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Stedman, and I'm here to talk to you about SchemaDrift and the process of going from development to test to production with moving database code and database schema. This is a pretty common thing in the development process, at least in a more mature development process. You start out where you have your development environment, and that's where developers work on a day-to-day basis. And then when their code gets ready to go or ready to be pushed to production, it goes into a testing environment, which can just be another database on the same server, or it can be a completely different SQL server. And then the third step after that, once it's been tested, is it goes to production. And this is one of those things that I have seen fail horribly over the years, where people try different things. They think they've got everything, but they don't have it all, or they forgot some important piece, and moving the code from one place to the other tend to be very problematic. So what I'm going to do is walk through a demo of kind of how this works and how we can use SchemaDrift as a tool to track and move those changes from one location to another. I have SQL Server Management Studio here and a script set up that's just going to drop and then recreate 3 test databases that I'm using here for demo purposes. One of them is going to be project1_dev, then _test, and then _production. So I just created those as 3 empty databases to sort of simulate the development process. I'm then going to use the development database. And like all good developers do when they start working in the database, they go and create a table for something. So I'm going to create a table called table 1. And then we're going to kind of walk through the process of how we can use SchemaDrift to save that, move that table from place to place, and then we'll add some more stuff in and make it a little bit more complicated. So I'm going to start by starting up the SchemaDrift application. I'm going to connect to my local server where I'm working here with Windows authentication. The database I'm going to use is called project1_dev. And the first thing I'm going to do is go and compare that to source control directory that I would normally be checking stuff in. And that's just in my users directory, user Steve documents, SchemaDrift test, project 1. So we hit the compare button, it goes out and compares everything in the database. And this is a small database with just one table in it. So we can see when it's done, there's nothing identical because all there is one table and it's only on one side. There's nothing different. Different means that a table or procedure or whatever exists in both locations and is different, but we've got only in source. So we've got this table 1 only exists in the source, and we'll right click and say save all to the destination directory. And when it saves that, you'll see over here in our project directory, there's a folder called tables created. And if you had procedures and other things, there would be folders for those created. And we can look and we can see there's the table 1 SQL script. And we'll just open with Notepad++, take a quick look at it. There it is. We can see there is our create table script. And you can then save that and run it on different servers. Or if we wanted to actually take this and instead of comparing to source control, we want to actually move the code from one database to another, we're going to go change this to connect to a database and then hit connect to the same server where I've created these 3 databases. And we're going to simulate moving from project1_dev over here to project1_test, meaning we're simulating moving it to a test environment. We hit compare. It goes out and compares everything between these 2 databases. And then when it's done, we can look and see that the only in source, the only thing that's different is this one table we added. All we have to do is right click. And before we do that, I want to go over here and look at the project 1 test database. And you can see here that there are no tables listed besides the system file tables, external tables, and graph tables. There's no user tables there. So we jump back to SchemaDrift. We just say add this table to the other database or to the destination there. And it says, yep, it's gone and done that. And when we refresh over here, you can see that this table 1 now exists with the columns matches the script over there. All right, so then you could do the same thing to move this staging to production. And what we could do there is we would just say go and change this from test, and then change this one over to production. And then you could do a comparison, and you can see that there's the only in source is listed there. And then we can say add this to the other database. It's going to add it into the production database now. And if we go back and compare, you can see at this point that it's showing now table 1 is identical between both databases. So that's the process of moving one table through the development process, or the development cycle there between development, testing, and production. But when we get more data or more tables, more schema, more procedures and whatnot, it makes things a little bit more complicated. So let's take a look at that. And what I'm going to do is, let's just say I've been working on this database, and then another database developer has been working, and that person has come up with some stuff. They've checked into source control. What we're going to do is go browse to the source control directory. And you can see in here, there's a number of things from defaults to functions to indexes and roles and schemas and whatnot. And then we're going to compare that first to my dev database so I can take what this other developer has done and bring it over to my work environment. We hit the compare here, and it went out and compared what was in the file system to what's in my dev database and came back and showed there's nothing identical and there's nothing different. And part of it is because the only table I have in my database is that test table 1. But you can see there's all these other objects from a schema called dog food. Somebody didn't must have left some test code in there, let's say, to a table called orders, sample data, and you can see the schema there. And there's a user called guest and a role called data writer and function called cubed. So all these things. And what I want to do is I want to take all of these and move them over to my dev environment from the file system. I could right click here and say add this table to the other database, and then right click and say add this user to the other database and go through it one by one there like that. Or the easier way, I can just say copy all scripts and then paste that into Management Studio, and it shows this is intended to be run on this server against this database, and it has the use database there. We're going to right click here and say copy all scripts. We're going to open a new window in Management Studio and then execute it. And then when it's done, we'll go and take a look at what's in my project 1 dev database, which exists right here. We'll refresh it. You can see now we have those sample tables that came over from the diffs. You can see there's some views there. So all that stuff just got moved over. Then the next thing we will do is we can then work on it. But if we run this and compare it again, we can now see that we have all of these items showing up as being identical. And why is the view showing different? So the view is different just because of some default settings here. So that's the quoted identifiers and ANSI nulls. Okay, so what's showing up different is only these settings around quoted identifiers and ANSI nulls. And those vary depending on the different settings that you have on the different SQL Server versions here. So that's one of those things that as we're going through this, I need to add in a way to filter out those options into SchemaDrift here. But keep in mind, this is a beta and we're coming across things like that. So it can't be a demo without finding something that's a little bit out of sync. So, but you can see we've got a number of things that are here, and then we can go and change our comparisons. So instead of comparing from the source control to that database, we'll change this back to connecting to a database. We're going to compare what's in dev. We're going to compare that over to test, and we can see that that table 1 that was already there is identical. There's nothing that's exists in both, but is different, but we have all these things that are only in source. So we could go and just right click and say, add this to the other database. And I'm going to do that here just to make it quick. And each time we do this, it's moving things over to the other database. Or we could have just done the copy all scripts like we saw before and move everything at once. This is not too bad to do if you're moving a small number of items, but if you're moving a large number of items, you could see how this would be not a very effective way to do it. And the scripting it like we did before would be the better way to do it. And there we go. Everything's been moved over. If we go back and we do the comparison again, we can now see all of these things are showing up as being identical between both sides. Nothing is different. Nothing is only in the source and nothing is only in the destination. So we have an exact match there. And we could use that exact same process to go from test to production. Let's just go ahead and do that. If we go test and then change this over to production, we're not going to worry about the identical because we don't want to change those. There's nothing that's in both but different. But here's what's only in the source. We're going to right click and say copy all scripts. We'll paste that into a new query editor window here. And this is going to be run against the Project 1 production database on this SQL server. And when we run that, it added all of those things that we manually added by right-clicking before, much quicker this way. We go back to settings, we hit compare, and now everything is showing up as identical between the test and the production database. So that's kind of the quick overview of what you can do with SchemaDrift to help manage changes in your source control and changes in your development environment and being able to track things that you're moving from one SQL server to the other. One of the ways of doing this that I've done that's always painful or that I've seen other people do is painful is You just go and find the procedures or tables you remember you changed, and then you move them over to the other environment. And then you have to go find other things that are missing that depend on those. What this will do is this will help you find all of those things that are missing so you can bring them over in one piece from one database to another and keep your environments in sync correctly. So I think that wraps it up. And this is just part of the demo of SchemaDrift and how it can be used for comparing databases.